They tell you the Imperium solves problems by vaporizing planets, but that's a comfortable myth. When it really wants to ruin you, it builds an entire world as your cell and calls that justice. Prison worlds aren't mercy softened by distance. Death is a budget cut. A planet of wardens is policy. Justice doesn't wear a blindfold. It wears a blast visor, keeps the receipt. Picture a sky strung with razor wire constellations and minefield halos, sunrise filtered through the lattices of defense satellites. The Adeptus Arbites, the Imperium's black-armored judges, call such places correctional theaters, which is administrative for graveyard you can invoice. Down below, mountains are quarried into amphitheaters of labor and confession. Whole continents are signed over to the idea that pain can be organized. We like to imagine criminals chained in neat lines, morality restored by iron neatness. That makes the tax ledgers tidy and the sermons short. The reality is a planet-sized city more than a cell, with currencies, gangs, and feast days. Only the feasts are ration windfalls, and the fireworks are collars misfiring. The wardens keep time with shock batons and water chits. In the Imperium, mercy is a rounding error. The tallyman smiles, and the sentence continues as budgets applaud. No one mistakes kindness. Everyone recognizes arithmetic wearing armor and ceremony. The one I want you to see is a forgotten rock, the charts label Oubliette 9. Oubliette, because you're meant to be discarded. 9, because someone ran out of names before prisoners. The warden lord is Provost Marshal Drouaine, an Arbit's lifer with a voice like ground glass. The local sun never quite burns through the ash, which the priests insist is symbolic. Oubliette 9 began as a reclamation colony, a pen where condemned workers breathed chemical ghosts so safer worlds didn't have to. When the Administratum's ledgers lost a tithe war with arithmetic, the colony became permanent. It's easier to extend fences than build new saints. The Munitorum, the Imperium's supply ministry, saw ore and bodies and called it efficiency. Our human lens is a man who never got used to the taste of iron. Corin Vale was born to a hive hab on the civil world Narcine, a place where air was graded and childhood ended with a shift whistle. He stole a data slate from a magistrate's nephew, which is less a crime than an affront. The Lex Imperialis, the Imperium's law, punishes aspiration more reliably than theft. Vale received 10 years of service reclamation, which, on shipping manifests, translated to indefinite. His transport spent months in the void, sharing a hold with servitors, lobotomized cyborg laborers, whose humming made the floor feel alive. When the lander's clamps opened, he tasted ash and old amperage. The first greeting was a collar still warm from the last man's neck. If you've never worn an explosive collar, here's the etiquette. Don't scratch, don't turn quickly near officers, and learn to sleep without rolling your head. The device is a conversation with your carotid. At least it makes introductions easy. The second greeting was a priest with a smile like a straightened nail. Life on a prison world is a mathematics of exhaustion. Wake to the siren. Work a strip mine where the air attacks your tongue. Return to a barracks that smells of ozone, disinfectant, and fear. Repeat, because time is a cell and you are its ornament. If you think the guards hate the prisoners, you misunderstand the system. The guards live here, raise ash-born children, and trade cigarettes folded from ration wrappers. They're paid in hours off and real water. Hate is too expensive to maintain when you're budgeting for air. The Arbit's precinct fortress dominates the horizon like a cathedral squatting on its knees. The walls are adamantine and ugly enough to be honest. Their guns track the weather out of habit. Drouaine's rule is simple. No riots that last longer than a prayer, no gangs that build temples, and no questions that require thought. People still ask questions. Why a prison world when vacuum is free? Why the pretense of reform when the economy runs on sin? The answer is logistics disguised as morality. Dead men don't push promethium drums, and martyrs can't mine ore. Here's the part they don't etch on plaques. Prison worlds are recruitment depots for when wars outgrow volunteers. Penal legions, Astra Militarum, the Imperial Guard, regiments made from convicts, are assembled here. They wear bomb collars and bright chevrons, so no one mistakes them for the virtuous, and their specialties include dying convincingly and doing the jobs you can't assign to a saint, with the auditor as their patron and a clipboard for a halo. Vale met his future on the morning the sirens endured too long. A transport thundered down, gray like a guilty thought. Commissar Beatrix Harl stepped from its ramp in a coat that carried its own weather. A commissar is a political officer whose job is to ensure the troops fear the emperor more than bullets. Harl had come shopping for bodies. The war front on the Gravesend Reach had eaten 3 regular regiments in 2 months, and the 4th was asking questions about maps. She walked the lines, reading charges like a menu: sedition, theft, heresy by association, because bad luck is a theology here. Vale tried to look forgettable and failed. Selection is a liturgy of humiliation. Names are called, collars synced, chains clipped to harness rings. A sermon promises glory and forgiveness in equal measures, while Confessor Malkai of the Ecclesiarchy, the state church, blessed the collars with oils that smelt like machine grease. Druane watched from a balcony with a stone face and a tired hand on the rail. On a prison world, losing your head is just following orders. The paperwork applauds. You want to know how a prison world matters to the Imperium? It turns problems into assets and assets into expendables. It is a factory refining guilt into obedience. It's also one miscalculated shipment from catastrophe, because despair is the favorite food of gods who don't eat politely. On the 3rd week outbound, the augurs picked up a pirate drift. Raiders in scrap metal hulls, probably a cult with engines covered in scripture written backward. Harl ordered the transport to run cold and quiet. When you carry 500 sinners and promise them liberation by death, pirates start to look like missionaries. Arriving at Gravesend, Vale discovered the joke at the heart of penal service. The only way to leave the prison was to enter a bigger one, and this one shot back. The trenches were scabbed with ice and chronic complaint. The enemy was a chaos militia, mortals who traded conscience for certainty, dug into manufactorum ruins with guns older than their grudges. The planet sounded like a sermon learning to curse. Penal troopers go forward in the first wave because tradition beats tactics. The collars don't detonate unless they run. The commissar's bolt pistol is faster justice. Still, something changes when the enemy shoots at you with equal contempt, and Vale felt it on that first charge, mud peeling off his boots like old lies. He kept running because stopping was a philosophical statement with teeth. The assault took 1 Hab block and 20% of their number. They were congratulated with new collars, warranted safe for another day, and a crate of recaf that tasted like burnt shadows. Harl delivered a speech about duty so tight you could ping it like a rail. Even the wind stood at attention out of fear it might be counted as a deserter. At night, Vale heard Oubliette 9 in his dreams. Sirens, vox prayers, the gentle clink of chain-rubbing brass. He wondered if anyone was still eating in his old barracks, still trading rust spice and stories. He wondered what would happen if the shipments stopped. The idea had the clean edges of a knife. Here is the twist we don't advertise. Prison worlds aren't just jails. They're locks on a region's stability. They centralize the dangerous, the unwanted, the unlucky, and quietly ensure no regular world becomes a breeding ground for revolt. But every lock needs a key, and on Oubliette 9, the key was off-world food. The administratum assumed shipments would always arrive. When a war like Gravesend bloats, freighters are reassigned, routes stagger, and a planet of prisoners learns what starvation whispers. The gangs become governments, the guards become diplomats, and the priest invents fresh sins whose penance is cannibalism by bureaucracy. Records conflict on what happened next. Some say sabotage, others say austerity. Choose the version with fewer miracles. A storm in the warp bloated travel times, and Drouain's stores dipped into creative. He cut rations to the bone, then took the bones too because they burned. When the Arbits rationed water, they also rationed patience, so the Dunpit gangs taxed corridors, and the almsmen of the East Shift sold absolution receipts stamped with Malchai's seal. A brawl at the mess lines turned into a mythology of betrayal. A prison world keeps the peace by regularity. When the clock fails, the creed follows. Drouain had one card left: export the problem. He sent an astropathic plea to the Munitorum, requesting authorization for mass conscription. 10,000 collars, 10,000 mouths off the ledger. The reply arrived crisp as winter. Sanctioned. The Emperor's mercy had been quantified to a decimal. Here's the ethical dilemma with polished boots. Is it kinder to herd the desperate into a meat grinder where at least the rations arrive, or let them die uncounted behind walls? Harl said choice is a luxury of the innocent. Malchai said the Emperor loves sacrifice, but hates waste. Drouain said nothing, which is also policy. Conscription Day looked like a festival if you ignored the weaponry. Bands of prisoners marched under gang colors that would be surrendered for unit patches. Mothers shoved sons forward because men with collars get meals. The wardens were careful, which meant nervous, which meant someone bled early so the rest remembered the choreography. Vale returned as cargo, a veteran with the dignity of experience and the wardrobe budget of a corpse. He was assigned to guide new penal recruits, tourism but grimmer. He walked them past the industry shrines to the machine god, past kiosks where Malchai's clerks stamped souls, past walls nicknamed for what they did to hands. Oubliette 9 felt smaller and somehow taller. Rumor claims some sectors outsource prisons to moonforts or void hulks, but here the planet itself was the cell. The geology conspired against escape. Razor grass that sliced filters, tar seas that swallowed vehicles without a ripple, and winds that learned your name so they could mock you later. Even the stars looked caged by the orbital rings. Nature had filed the paperwork. Training for penal recruits is brutally short because failure is also useful. First lesson: don't die by your own kit. Second, run towards someone else's idea of redemption. Third, look grateful while an Arbits handler explains the collar's motivational spectrum. Between drills, Vale watched Drouain and Harl argue like professionals who admire each other's cruelty. Harl needed bodies fast. Drouain needed calm, slower. Malchai proposed mass baptism in the cooling ponds, which would have improved hygiene if not faith. On a prison world, you either find religion or a spoon, Vale said once, and only one gets you past the walls. The joke traveled faster than rations. The surprise wasn't that Oubliette 9 produced soldiers. It was that it produced any loyalty at all. Penal troopers formed units by hometown and hatred. They shared smuggled stories about imaginary kitchens and the texture of real bread. Work chants and death hymns harmonized until the two were hard to tell apart, a choir that sounded like machinery praying. Harl, against stereotype, listened. She met with gang lieutenants and offered deals ugly enough to be honest. Good behavior meant frontline assignments where loot existed. Heroic behavior meant collar keys that sometimes fit. She shot a ringleader to prove her sincerity. It's not hypocrisy if the policy works. Then came the signal that turned equations feral. A heretic fleet arrived, scarred ships broadcasting sermons about liberation and choice. Their plan was simple: crack the prison world and harvest a rebellion, then spend it on someone else's ruin. The sky learned new ways to fall. Orbital batteries opened like thunder with purpose. The minefields wrote new constellations in shrapnel, but you can't guard every sky and feed every mouth. Some raiders bled through. They hit the reclamation pits and the transport yards, places with bad cover and good leverage. This skirmish isn't famous, which makes it perfect. Oubliette 9 didn't get laurels. It got scar tissue. Vale found himself leading a detachment of green-collared recruits, because being the last man still standing upright is a kind of promotion. The enemy wore patchwork armor and confidence, shouting freedom like it was a weapon. Their first volley cut down 3 who never learned the third lesson. Vale tasted metal, and the year he stole that data slate, and realized both flavors were the same. They moved through the transport yard in fits and lunges, cover a negotiation with rust. Harl's orders crackled through the vox, clipped and calm, promising nothing but clear verbs. A breacher slammed a charge against the gate of the collar control hub, the building that could turn 5,000 necks into smoke. The calculus sharpened. Vale saw it, the way you see a cliff differently after you've already fallen once. He led a sprint that shouldn't have worked, and yet did, because habit can be courage when it has nowhere else to go. There's no romance to defusing demo ordnance under fire. It's a dance with missing steps. Vale ripped the charge free, not because he knew what he was doing, but because dying confused seemed worse. The bomb went harmless after an unhelpful prayer. For a second, the yard went quiet in that rude way battle sometimes allows. The heretic was very young. In another world, he would have learned to fix engines instead of gates. Vale wondered if Oubliette had exported its rage so thoroughly it now returned with someone else's flag. He didn't have time to write an essay, so he shot the boy because the present is greedy. The raiders pushed again, hungry for the hub and the symbol. Penal troopers held because their collars told them to, and because the ground under their boots finally meant something. Harl arrived with 6 veterans and a rack of grenades, then left with 5 and no grenades, because that was the math today. Drouaine finally spoke over Vox and said one word: persist. There are battles that decide sectors and battles that decide evenings. This one decided a kind of dignity. When the raiders broke, it wasn't because they feared death, but because they discovered a place where despair had already claimed squatters' rights. Oubliette 9 refused to change owners. After the smoke, the counts came in like winter. Casualty lists read like biographies ruined too early. The collar hub stood, the transports were scarred, and the planet kept turning on time even if the clocks had doubts. Malkai organized a massive Thanksgiving and apologized to the Almighty for the quality of the choir. It wasn't a victory parade, but the dead had excellent attendance. Harl did something brave and practical. She argued to the Munitorum that Oubliette 9 had earned supply priority, not charity. Her logic was iron with scuffs. The prison had proven it could hold itself, which made feeding it cheaper than reconquering it. The request went up the chain into a machine that lives on delay. Weeks later, pallets arrived with a note that read, "Good accounting." Drouaine instituted a change almost nobody noticed beyond immediate relief. He replaced random punishments with random rewards. A good shift might mean hot water or an hour under sun lamps. Prison requires ritual. He rebuilt new ones out of trivial mercies. Riots eased because boredom returned, which is civilization in a cheap jacket. Did Oubliette 9 become a better place? Define better. It remained a planet-sized cell with a job to do and a want to ignore. The collars still blinked, the gangs tithed, and the transport yard smelled like someone set hope on fire and kept the smoke for warmth. Improvement in the Imperium is often indistinguishable from survival. Vale earned a medallion shaped like an eye that meant he could die farther from home. He didn't get a key. He did get an offer, a transfer to a regular line unit after 3 more excellent citations, which is like promising a hungry man a dream of soup. He took it because humans are good at bargaining with the future. So return to the claim you wanted to reject. Prison worlds don't just punish. They organize suffering into utility. They are parts bins for the galaxy's worst day, stocked in advance. Killing wastes the asset. Imprisoning amortizes it over campaigns. There is a cost you can't ledger, even in a government that counts prayers. Prison worlds concentrate despair like promethium, and despair explodes. They become academies where men learn to speak in resentments, a dialect chaos understands without translation. Every gagged scream is an audition for a darker choir. Yet the Imperium persists because it has trimmed existence down to one rule. Survival is a sacrament. If a planet must be a jail to hold the line, then the line will be held with shackles welded from principle and fear. The ordinary people under that sky still laugh at bad jokes and still steal clean water when no one looks. Humanity is good at finding a corner and living there. Vale leaves the world the way most do, catalogued, collared, and convinced the next place will at least be different. He boards another transport, walks past servitors humming the same note, and inhales Risic air that tastes like yesterday's mistakes. He doesn't look back. On prison worlds, the horizon is a dare, not a promise. Remember this. Oubliette 9 stood because men with no right to call themselves free acted like it for an hour. The Arbits held because they remembered a law older than their armor. The Commissar led because fear, properly applied, can point the right way. The priest prayed because someone has to be talking when death passes by. If there is a lesson, and there always is, even if it arrives late, it's that the Imperium's cruelty is rarely pointless. It is monstrous, calculated, and sometimes effective. A prison world is where the Imperium sends people it doesn't want to kill yet, because certain deaths are more useful when scheduled. That bothers me. You can argue this is sustainable as long as the engines run. You can argue every civilization builds oubliettes and calls them policy. What you cannot argue, if you were there when the breacher laughed and the bomb blinked, is that the math is simple. It never is, and the people inside the equations are the ones who bleed. So when you hear that a planet is a prison, don't imagine a single wall. Imagine a network of promises designed to outlive the truth. Picture a sky heavy with guardians whose primary weapon is time. Understand that the gates open inward more easily than outward. Prison worlds matter because they make the Imperium possible on a schedule. They are the gears that bite when the saints hesitate. They are not merciful or efficient so much as inevitable. You build them not to be just, but to be ready. And what of Corin Vale? He will fight in trenches that have never seen rain. He will learn the shape of the war he purchased with a theft that damaged a noble's pride. If the Emperor is kind, Vale will die with mud rather than ash in his mouth. You already know the punchline. On a prison world, Freedom isn't the opposite of captivity. It's the speed at which the door closes. The Imperium knows this and counts accordingly. If you want more dives into the void, you know where to find us.